So I very recently reviewed the Highland Park 12-year-old from the 1980s and found that it's much better than modern 12-year-old Highland Park. So I thought it would only be fair and fitting to taste the modern Highland Park 18-year-old and see how that compares. This is Highland Park 18-year-old Viking Pride. So I'm going to get this out of the way right at the start. Highland Park Viking Pride is a really silly name. It's not as silly as Dragon Legend or Thor or Viking Scars, but it's still silly and it's a bit unnecessary, especially for an 18-year-old single malt Scotch whisky, which should be something that's taken very seriously. Interestingly, if you look online, I am seeing quite a bit of backlash over the Viking rebranding of Highland Park. A lot of people seem to agree with me. So, just out of interest, leave your thoughts in the comments and tell me what you think about the Viking rebranding. Do you like it? Do you hate it? Or do you really not care? But for now, let's not let the rebranding get in the way. Let's concentrate on the whisky. So this is what used to be simply known as Highland Park 18-year-old, and it is bottled at 43% ABV. So this is another one that's always really bugged me that they don't bottle it at a proper strength, but at least it's not 40%. So let's see how it noses. And I will also mention that I've had this one in the glass for quite a few minutes, because I think that the Highland Park 18 is one that really benefits from breathing a little bit. So on the nose, it is a lovely sweet and smoky whisky. So Highland Park is one of the few Scottish distilleries that still peat some of their malt in-house on their own in-house floor maltings. But it's not an Islay peat at all. It's a much... In a way, it's a gentler peat. It's not as in-your-face as a Lafroig or an Ardbeg, but it's still a lovely flavoursome peat. But it's a more floral and, in a way, more complex peat than what you get on Islay. And you're getting lots of that lovely Orcadian peat smoke in this whisky. It's actually quite interesting that you're probably getting more peat smoke in the Highland Park 18-year-old than I got definitely in the modern 12-year-old, and more than you got in the 1980s 12-year-old as well. As with a lot of Highland Parks, I'm getting quite a bit of honey and apple on the nose, and in particular with this 18-year-old, getting some quite strong notes of salted caramel. It's actually quite a modern flavour when you think about it. Salted caramel is quite a recent trend, and I'm getting quite a lot of it in this whisky. Also getting some rubberiness, a little touch of aniseed, and some rather nice herbal grassy peat as well. So there's lots of different types of peat in there. It really is a complex peatiness. Also getting a touch of mint, some green apples, and some melon on the nose. And as you would expect with an 18-year-old whisky, also getting some lovely old malted barley notes on the nose as well. You can definitely tell that it's not your standard 12-year-old whisky. I'm not sure that I would guess in a blind tasting that this one's 18 years old, but it definitely tastes like it's been well matured. What is surprising is that the fruitiness on the nose is particularly bright. For an 18-year-old whisky, it's particularly bright and sharp and focused. And that's something that you can quite often lose when a whisky gets towards the 20-year mark, but that hasn't happened at all with this one. Just like on the nose, up front you've got a big hit of honey and old maltiness, and it's a really rich and sweet and smoky maltiness as well. It's really by no means a peat bomb. It's not going to have anywhere near the phenol levels, the ppm, of pretty much anything that you get on Islay, but it's really a complex and really nice and multifaceted peatiness. Something really curious is the smokiness from the peat combined with that salted caramel note really merges into something that's reminiscent of kippers, smoked salted fish. Also getting lots of sweet fruit on the palate, and again there's a little bit of a cough candy note on the palate as well. So that's aniseed again popping up, and it's something a little bit akin to a Bowmore. It's that aniseed cough candy fisherman's friend note that is definitely present in this is something you quite often get in a lot of Bowmores. As for the finish, I'm going to say medium, not going to go quite as far as medium long, with lots of old maltiness, quite a hit of cough sweet on the finish, and there is a reasonably strong herbal note on the finish as well. As for a grade, I'm going to give this one a B+. I really think that the current modern Highland Park 18-year-old is really in a position where the 12-year-old really should be, or at least be closer to. I think this 18-year-old at 43%, it's not overwhelming in any one sense, but it's just a really great all-rounder whisky. And I feel like this 18-year-old at 43% is really around the point where I could imagine the 12-year-old being if it didn't have those horrible batch variation issues and if they bottled it at a higher strength. As it is, the 18-year-old at 43%, I'm going to say that it has more body and more complexity than the current 12-year-old, and it's a much, much better whisky. But when you compare it to the 12-year-old from the 1980s that I reviewed recently, I'd actually prefer the 12-year-old from the 1980s. For anybody that's interested, this whisky that I'm tasting today is the Highland Pride 18-year-old Viking Pride, which is the current bottling, and I have done an A/B testing between this and a bottling of the 18-year-old pre-Viking rebranding, and I would say that the current 18-year-old is a little bit milder, but they're actually very similar whiskies. I think that Highland Park's done a really good job of keeping the flavour profile and the level of quality really consistent over the years with the 18-year-old, which is really good. So, do I recommend Highland Park 18-year-old Viking Pride? It is a really good whisky. There's no two ways about it. This is a really enjoyable single malt Scotch whisky. And I would recommend it to anyone who is, like myself, a fan of the older whiskies, people that like things with a little bit more complexity and a little bit more nuance. And I'd recommend it to people who like whiskies that have those flavours that you only really get with whiskies that are in their high teens to low 20s. But I would also say that the price this sells for in the UK, around £100 a bottle, you can probably get much better value and higher strength and probably more complex 18-year-old whiskies for a similar or lower price. So that's Highland Park 18-year-old. A really good whisky, definitely one to try, but in terms of buying a bottle, probably only one that I'd recommend that you purchase if you're already a big fan of Highland Park, or if you're just looking for that extravagant treat. Cheers.